Have you ever felt the weight of people's judgment before you even opened your mouth? That was Elena Ward's reality the moment she stepped off the train in Benton Hollow, Wyoming territory in the autumn of 1874. The day was brisk, the kind where the wind carried both dust and whispers. The small settlement, built of clapboard storefronts and a scattering of homesteads, always came alive when the train arrived. Farmers left their plows, women pulled their children close, and curious faces lined the station platform. The hiss of steam filled the air as the locomotive screeched to a stop. Out of the haze stepped Elena. Her dress was modest, sky blue with a faded ivory trim. The hem was travel-worn, her boots dusty from miles of train stations and layovers. But her back was straight, her gloved hand steady on the handle of a single leather valise. Her face, framed by brown hair pinned neatly, carried both weariness and quiet hope. She had traveled from Missouri, carrying not just her belongings, but her future. She spotted the family she had been corresponding with through letters. Mrs. Ashford, sharp-eyed and commanding in her black lace gloves, stood stiff as a judge. Her son Roy, lanky and awkward, shifted nervously, while his older sister Miriam looked on with mild curiosity. Elena stepped forward with a gentle smile, extending her hand. "Mrs. Ashford," she said warmly, "I am Elena Ward. Thank you for welcoming me." The older woman raised a hand before Elena could continue. Her eyes swept Elena from head to toe, pausing at the faint lines around her mouth, the small creases near her eyes. Her lips pursed. "You're older than we expected," she said flatly. Elena blinked, her smile faltering but not breaking. "I'm 28, ma'am. It was written plainly in the letter." The number seemed to sour the air. 28. The crowd around them shifted as though they too had a stake in this judgment. Mrs. Ashford sniffed. "We were promised a youthful bride. My son deserves a wife who can bear children, sons. You do not look youthful. You look worn." The words stung, but Elena held her ground. "I am healthy, capable." Mrs. Ashford cut her off. "We will not argue. You are not suitable. This arrangement is over. Return to your train." Roy never lifted his eyes from his boots. Miriam rolled hers, bored of the scene. Mrs. Ashford turned sharply and walked away, her children following. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Too old. Poor woman. All that way for nothing." Elena looked down at her boots, dust dulling their shine. Her fingers tightened on her valise, knuckles white beneath the glove. But she did not cry. She would not break for a crowd that had already dismissed her. And from the far edge of the platform, Caleb Boone, a weathered rancher leaning against a stack of freight crates, watched in silence. He hadn't come for spectacle, only for horse feed. But in Elena's quiet strength, in the way she refused to crumple under humiliation, he saw something no one else did. Resilience. The rancher steps forward. Elena walked off the platform with measured steps. Each one was heavy with humiliation, but her back stayed straight. Behind her, the hiss of the train mocked her with the promise of escape. Ahead lay nothing but dirt roads stretching into unfamiliar land. Her mind churned. She had left Missouri with hope, thinking she would start fresh as a mail-order bride. She had read letters, imagined a home, even dreamed of children's laughter filling it. Now, after 1,000 miles, she had been turned away like livestock, unfit for sale. Footsteps followed her. She turned slightly, prepared for another insult, but instead saw Caleb Boone approaching. His face was rough-hewn, marked by sun and wind. His shoulders were broad, his coat patched, his boots scuffed by years of ranch labor. He carried no expression of pity, only a quiet steadiness. "You don't need to say anything," Elena said softly, voice steady but tired. "I know what it looked like." Caleb stopped a step away. He turned his hat in his hands, eyes steady. Wasn't going to apologize for them, just wanted to say, if they don't want you, that's their loss. The words nearly broke her composure. She let out a small laugh, though it was closer to a sigh. That doesn't give me a roof, Mr. Boone, he answered. Caleb Boone. I've got a place west of here, quiet, just me, a barn that's too empty and some horses hanging on. Not much else, but it's a roof. You can rest there until you figure what comes next. Her brow furrowed. Are you offering me work? No, he said firmly. Rest. That's all. She studied him carefully. He didn't strike her as the type to waste words. He wasn't offering charity, only honesty. She glanced once back at the train, steam curling skyward like a beckoning hand. Then she looked at him and nodded. All right. Caleb put his hat back on, gestured toward his horse tethered nearby. Then let's ride before someone else decides to give you advice. The townsfolk returned to their chatter, uninterested in what became of her. But as Elena mounted behind Caleb and they turned westward, she felt something stir within her. Not relief, not safety, but perhaps the beginning of understanding between two people who knew what it was to be unwanted. The House of Silence. The Boone Ranch appeared hours later, just as the sun dipped low. The land was wide and quiet, but it bore scars of hardship. The barn leaned, weathered by storms. The fences sagged in places. 3 thin horses moved slowly in the paddock. And in the far pen stood Flint, an aging gray gelding with one leg bowed, his head held proudly as if to say he still belonged. Caleb nodded toward him. First horse I ever broke, thought he wouldn't last the winter. He stays. Earned it, Elena. Heard something in his voice. Not pity, but loyalty. She dismounted stiffly, her muscles sore. I'm not looking for charity, she said, her chin raised. Caleb gave a short nod. Good, I don't have any. The house smelled of dust, wood, and faint traces of long-ago meals. On a shelf in the kitchen, Elena noticed a jar labeled Ma's Jam, 1863, the faded writing curling with age. She touched it gently, realizing this house carried ghosts as much as it carried life. Caleb showed her a narrow room at the end of the hall. Door sticks when it's cold, he said. She placed her valise on the small trunk by the bed. That night she lay awake, listening to the wind moan through the boards, wondering if she had simply exchanged one kind of loneliness for another. But in the morning, outside her door sat a tin cup of warm milk. No note, no words, just quiet kindness. She began tidying carefully, respectfully, scrubbing linens, stacking plates, sweeping corners, not to impose, but because work steadied her heart. Caleb moved outside, mending fences, oiling tools, tending the horses. They passed each other in silence, offering only nods. Yet this silence felt different, not cruel, not judgmental, just waiting. The past that won't let go. Elena settled into the Boone Ranch with quiet determination, but even in new surroundings, old ghosts find their way back. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters and silence filled the hall, she reached for pen and paper. By the glow of a lantern, she wrote to Thomas, the man who had once promised her a life that never came. He had left for the war and never returned. For years she had waited, clinging to the hope that a letter might come back, that his name might appear on a passenger list. It never did. Still, writing to him gave her a strange comfort, as though her words might carry across the void. One evening, as her hand moved across the page, a voice stirred at the door. You still write to him? Caleb's voice was low, not accusing, just careful. Elena, startled, then set the pen down gently. Sometimes, she said softly. Words are the only place he still exists. Caleb nodded, neither encouraging nor dismissing, and walked away. But his presence lingered with her, long after he left. Days later, while gathering kindling near the barn, Elena noticed fresh-turned soil at the edge of the yard. Something about it tugged at her. Curiosity overcame hesitation. Kneeling, she brushed the earth aside and unearthed a small wooden box. Inside were her own letters, dozens of them. The ones she had tried to send over the past months, perhaps lost or discarded at the depot. Tied carefully with twine, every single one had been collected, and on top, a slip of paper in Caleb's rough, square handwriting. "Stop writing ghosts. The living are here." Her breath caught. For a moment, her pride flared. How dare he keep what wasn't his? But the anger faded almost as quickly as it came. He hadn't mocked her grief, hadn't destroyed her words. He had simply protected them, safeguarded them until she could decide whether to let go. That evening, when she returned to her room, another small gesture awaited her. Beside the warm cup of milk outside her door was something new. A hand-carved wooden scoop, smoothed and polished, the handle engraved with simple swirls. No note, no explanation, just a quiet offering. Elena turned it over in her hands, tracing the patterns. It wasn't a gift that demanded thanks. It was recognition. Proof that he saw her effort, saw her worth. For the first time in months, maybe years, a smile tugged at her lips in the dark. The Widow in Black Benton Hollow was not a large town, but it was loud in its judgments. Rumors began to circle faster than a hawk riding the thermals. "She's after his land. Too old to wed, so she plays house." The whispers spread from the mercantile to the church steps, carried by voices that had little else to do. Elena heard them, though no one dared say it to her face. She saw it in lingering stares, in the way conversations hushed when she walked past. Then, one morning, a polished black buggy rolled up the Boone Ranch Road. Out stepped Prudence Vale, widow of Judge Vale, a woman with wealth, influence, and ambition. She was dressed in satin too fine for the dust, her gloves spotless, her smile sharpened like a knife hidden in silk. She carried a basket of peach preserves, setting it down on the porch as though she were bestowing a favor. My, Prudence said smoothly, her eyes flicking over Elena. "You're prettier than I expected. Not as young, of course, but refined in your own way." Elena's spine stiffened, though her voice remained polite. "Thank you, Mrs. Vale. Mr. Boone is in the pasture." "Oh, I'm not here for him, not directly." Prudence's smile widened, false sweetness dripping from every word. "I'm hosting a gathering on Friday for the better half of Benton Hollow. Music, cards, conversation. I would be delighted if Caleb joined us." Elena nodded, her hands tightening on the preserves. "I'll let him know." Prudence leaned closer, her perfume strong enough to sting. "I do hope he treats you kindly. Not many men understand how to manage a woman's expectations, especially one who isn't family." With that, she swept back into her buggy, the wheels spinning dust into the air as though even the earth didn't deserve to touch her gown. That evening, Caleb mentioned it casually as he worked on his boots. "Got asked to some party," he muttered, not meeting Elena's eyes. "You should go," Elena said, folding laundry quietly. He hesitated. "You could come." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's not my kind of place." So he went, and she stayed. That night, she set 2 plates on the table, then quietly put one away. She ate in silence, the ticking clock louder than her heartbeat. At dawn, she began to pack, not hurried, not dramatic, simply deliberate. She folded her dresses carefully, tied her letters into a bundle, and set the carved wooden scoop back on the nightstand. On the table, she left a scrap of paper. "You gave me a roof. Thank you." She meant to leave without a goodbye. The fire and the return. By afternoon, the sky carried a different kind of smoke. Caleb smelled it before he saw it, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. The barn, the dry hay had caught, flames leaping faster than hands could quench. He ran, shouting hoarsely as he dragged one horse free. The younger chestnut bolted, terrified. The bay resisted, kicking against its stall. And Flint, faithful Flint, stood frozen in his pen, eyes wide. Caleb plunged deeper into the inferno, coughing, his shoulder screaming with pain. A beam cracked overhead. Before he could move, it came down hard, pinning him against the stall wall. Smoke filled his lungs, fire clawing at the air. Miles away on the ridge, Elena stopped. The sky wore a column of black, rising from the place she had come to know as hers. She dropped her valise where it fell, skirts gathering dust as she ran. Her lungs burned, but her heart pushed her forward. "Caleb!" she cried, bursting into the yard. The barn roared like thunder. She grabbed a water pail, flung it against the flames. It was useless. Without hesitation, she pulled her shawl across her nose and threw the barn doors wide. Inside, the world was smoke and heat. "Caleb!" she screamed again. A faint cough answered. She staggered toward the sound, eyes stinging, hair singed. There he was, slumped against the stall, blood running down his temple, one arm limp. "You stubborn, foolish man," she whispered, choking, as she heaved him to his feet. He groaned, but she forced his arm over her shoulders, dragging him step by step. A falling ember lit her sleeve aflame. She beat it out with trembling hands and kept moving. The barn groaned, beams buckling. Just as the roof gave way, they stumbled into the dirt, collapsing in a heap as fire swallowed the building whole. Ash and sparks rained down around them. Caleb coughed, barely conscious, his voice a rasp. "You came back." Elena pressed her soot-blackened hand to his cheek. "Of course I did. You saved me first. You just didn't know it." The confession of the broken. The barn was gone, reduced to blackened beams and ash that smoldered for days. Caleb Boone lay inside the house, on a narrow cot by the hearth, his shoulder bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady. The flames had nearly claimed him, but Elena's determination had pulled him back. Now, as the wind rattled outside, she sat beside him with a cloth, dabbing carefully at the burns along his jaw. Caleb winced at her touch, but he didn't turn away. His voice, when it came, was a whisper edged with gravel. "You shouldn't have gone in after me." Elena's hand paused. "And left you to die in there? That wasn't an option." His eyes flicked open, locking on hers. The firelight reflected the storm he carried inside. "I didn't think anyone would come back for me." He swallowed hard. "People leave. That's what they do. They go and I stay. That's the way it's always been." Her chest tightened. She saw not just a man scarred by fire, but one scarred by loss upon loss. "Maybe they left," she said gently, "because they were waiting for you to ask them to stay." Caleb let the silence stretch. The only sound was the crackle of the hearth and the faint rattle of wind at the shutters. Slowly, as though unsure, he reached out. His calloused hand found hers. He didn't grip it tightly, didn't cling. He simply rested there, rough skin against hers, offering trust without demand. Elena looked down at their joined hands. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she felt chosen, not for her youth, not for her ability to give sons, but for herself. The simplicity of that choice felt more powerful than any declaration. In that small, quiet moment, with ash still curling from the fields outside, something in both of them shifted. They were no longer two strangers bound by chance. They were something more, two people who finally realized they weren't meant to carry their burdens alone. The Town Gathers Autumn brought Benton Hollow's annual fair. The town square filled with wagons, stalls of apples, and children laughing as fiddles played quick tunes. But Elena felt none of the joy. In her glove was a folded ticket for the train. She had packed again, telling herself it was better to leave before gossip consumed them both. She stood at the platform where everything had begun, her heart heavy as the whistle sounded in the distance. Then the murmurs rose. People turned, whispering as a figure limped down the street. Caleb Boone, bruised and bandaged, walked with determination onto the platform. The crowd hushed, sensing something important was about to happen. Caleb stopped a few feet from Elena, his voice rough but strong enough to carry. "You all saw her the first time she came here," he began. "You saw how she was turned away, told she was too old, unwanted." Faces shifted uncomfortably, some looking down at their boots. "What you didn't see," he continued, "was what came after. She walked back into fire when no one else would. She pulled me out when I was too stubborn to save myself. Not because anyone told her to, because she wanted to." He turned his gaze fully on Elena. "If she's too old for the likes of you, then let me be the man who keeps her. Not because I need a wife, but because I need her." The words hung in the still air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a clap broke the silence, an old farmer nodding slowly. Another joined, and soon applause rippled through the platform, not loud, but honest. Elena felt her throat tighten. The ticket slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the boards. She stepped forward and took Caleb's hand. In front of the town that once whispered against her, she made her choice. The proposal beneath the orchard winter passed, and with spring came renewal. Together, Caleb and Elena rebuilt the barn. Flint, old but proud, still stood watch as two foals were born. Elena opened a small school on the porch, teaching children whose families couldn't afford formal lessons. Caleb worked the land, his silence no longer heavy, but content. One March evening, blossoms spread across the apple orchard. Under their pale canopy, Caleb paused, his hands fidgeting with something hidden behind his back. Elena turned, surprised to see him looking uncharacteristically nervous. He sank to one knee in the dirt, holding out a small ring, rough, made from an old horseshoe, its metal dark but strong. His voice was low but steady. "You were never too old, Elena, just too real for fools who couldn't see it. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could speak. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "Always yes." The ranch filled with new life again, and when their daughter was born months later, Caleb held the tiny child close. "Hope," he said softly, "because it's what you carried, and what you gave back to me. Love that stays." Years passed on the Boone Ranch. The barn stood strong again, children's laughter filled the porch school, and the once suspicious town now greeted Elena with respect. No one called her the rejected bride anymore. She was Mrs. Boone, the woman who had chosen and been chosen. One winter night, snow drifted softly against the windows. Inside, the fire glowed warm. Elena rocked little Hope to sleep, humming softly. Caleb sat near the hearth, repairing a saddle strap, his hands steady. Outside, Flint lay in the snow by the porch, as if guarding the family that had given him purpose, even in age. Elena looked around the modest room, the patched quilt, the mended chair, the tin cup still set by the door each morning. Love, she realized, wasn't in grand gestures or fiery words. It was in staying, in seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. And beneath the wide Wyoming sky, Elena no longer wondered where she belonged. She had already arrived. This truly was the Wild West love story she had been searching for all along.